My wife asked for a divorce because of another man. One minute I was her husband, the next I was a stranger she couldn't wait to leave behind. So I packed what was left of my dignity, vanished from the city we once called home, and tried to rebuild a life without her shadow. But just when I thought I'd escaped, she started showing up everywhere outside my apartment, at the trail where I ran, even at the cafe I'd chosen to disappear into. Weeks earlier, she was ready to throw me away. Now she was chasing me like I was the one who left her broken. Then her parents, people I deeply respected, called to apologize for her. That hurt even more because it meant they knew exactly what she'd done. And still I couldn't bring myself to speak to any of them. Because the truth is, some wounds don't heal when the person who caused them refuses to let you go. Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. If you find stories like mine meaningful, feel free to subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know, especially to people like me who once felt invisible. My name is Kyle, and this is what really happened. My name is Cale Rourke. I'm 30 years old, a structural engineer in Santa Fe. The kind of job that keeps your shoulders tight and your mind wired even when the day is supposed to be over. Most nights I come home with the kind of exhaustion that settles deep in the bones, an exhaustion I've learned to wear like a second skin. Verena Holt. My wife used to tell me she admired that about me, how steady I was, how predictable in a world where nothing stayed constant. She was nothing like me, 28, an illustrator with a mind that moved like wildfire, beautiful in a way that felt untouchable, magnetic in ways I never tried to understand, and emotionally unpredictable in ways I tried too hard to excuse. Recently, though, something about her felt different. She wasn't pulling away enough for anyone else to notice, but I could feel the shift the way you feel a house settle at night, quiet, subtle, but impossible to ignore. Some evenings she barely looked up when I came home late. Other nights she'd snap at me for no reason, accusing me of being distracted, distant. I couldn't tell her the truth, that the late nights weren't distance but devotion, that I'd been taking on extra projects to buy a small place in Tasuke as an anniversary surprise. I told myself she'd understand once she saw it, once she realized why I'd been pushing myself so hard. But the more I tried to hold the surprise, the more the space between us stretched in ways I couldn't explain. The pressure broke open at a gallery event one night. Verena was showing a series she'd been working on for months, and I was proud, genuinely proud, until she turned on me in front of her artist friends, her voice sharp, irritated, accusing me of not taking her work seriously enough. The room went silent. I stood there embarrassed, trying to smile it off while something inside me curled in on itself. When our eyes met, I saw something I'd never seen in her before: distance. Cold, quiet distance. On the way home, she mentioned almost offhand that she felt like I was hiding something from her. I said I wasn't. She didn't believe me. And for a split second, I caught sight of a man standing next to her earlier at the gallery, Jace Marrow, a lighting designer she'd worked with. The way he looked at her wasn't subtle. I pushed the thought away because the alternative would have torn a hole straight through my chest. But that night, as we walked into the house, Verena asked if I was still interested in our marriage. No warning, no build-up, just a blunt question cutting straight through the dark. I stood there stunned, holding the signed contract for the house still tucked inside my briefcase. For the first time, I felt something fracture. A quiet, sinking sense that something had begun to break, and I had no idea how far the crack would spread. The weeks that followed were a blur of double shifts, late-night drafting sessions, and early morning site visits. I kept telling myself the work would be worth it once I handed her the keys to that Tasuke house, once she saw the life I'd been building behind the scenes. But the more I pushed myself, the more Verena pulled back. She started complaining that I felt cold, that I was becoming unreachable, and even when I tried to reassure her, it was like talking through fog. Then came the comments about Jace. At first, harmless things: his humor, his insightful creative notes, the way he understood the tone she wanted for her new series. I pretended it didn't bother me, but I caught the shift in her voice every time she said his name. And then just as suddenly, she stopped talking about him altogether. Not a word. Not a mention. That silence scared me more than her enthusiasm ever did, because it told me something had crossed a line whether she admitted it or not. One afternoon I met with Lysandra Vaughn, one of my closest friends, and someone who used to work with Verena. She didn't dance around it. She told me outright that a few people in Verena's circle had been encouraging her to find new inspiration emotionally, their polite artist way of telling her she could do better than a tired engineer who came home late. Worse, she said Jace had been the one pursuing Verena, not the other way around. It felt like someone had knocked the wind out of me. All the moments I'd brushed off his lingering looks, her sudden defensiveness, the abrupt silence snapped together like puzzle pieces I'd been too scared to assemble. When I got home, Verena was waiting in the living room. She didn't yell, didn't accuse. Her voice was calm, but too calm. She said she needed space, time, that she didn't feel connected to me anymore. My first instinct was to fix it, to reach for her, to ask what had changed, but the words died somewhere in my throat. I agreed to the break because I didn't know what else to do. As she walked upstairs, her phone lit up on the coffee table with a message, one I wasn't supposed to see. Jace. Just that one name. I stared at it so long the screen dimmed and went black again. I didn't confront her. I didn't say a word. But inside, something froze over. And as I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, I realized the crack I'd felt before wasn't a crack anymore. It was the start of something collapsing, and no matter how much I wanted to stop it, I could already hear the beams shifting, the foundation giving way, the quiet beginning of something breaking beyond repair. The weeks we spent apart should have given me clarity, but all they did was turn my mind into a reel I couldn't stop replaying. Every moment with Verena played back sharper than when it happened, the shift in her tone, the way her eyes drifted past me instead of landing on me, the half-finished conversations that died in her throat because she was already somewhere else. I kept trying to pinpoint the exact second things began slipping, but the truth was they had been unraveling quietly long before I noticed. I'd sit alone in the small rental where I was staying temporarily, staring at the half-packed boxes from the life I thought we were building, and my mind would drag me through every sign I ignored. One afternoon I grabbed coffee at a place Verena and I used to go to, hoping the familiarity would steady me. Instead, I ran into Fallon, one of her closest friends in the artist circle. She brightened when she saw me, like she didn't know anything was wrong, and casually mentioned how everyone at the studio had been saying how in sync Verena and Jace looked lately, how their creative chemistry was all anyone talked about. She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, then froze the second she saw the look on my face. When I told her Verena and I had separated, she looked genuinely shocked. That told me everything I needed to know. Whatever Verena was telling her friends, it wasn't the truth. Whatever story she had been living in, I wasn't part of it anymore. That night I called Verena. I didn't want to dance around it, didn't want to keep guessing. I asked her outright if she had feelings for Jace. She didn't answer at first. The silence stretched so long I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost apologetic. She said she hadn't crossed any physical lines, but she felt a connection, something she couldn't ignore. Something she was confused by. Hearing that felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed until everything caved in. I couldn't even speak for a moment. I just stared at the wall, feeling the world tilt. We agreed to meet the next day in a quiet cafe tucked behind an antique store, a place no one we knew would walk into. When she sat down, she looked smaller, somehow, tired, unsure. Before she could say anything, I told her about the Tesuk house, about the hours I'd been working, about the plans I'd made for us. Her face changed as I spoke, shock, regret, guilt, but none of it mattered, because she still couldn't answer the one question that had been poisoning me from the inside, if she still loved me. Why did a few weeks of distance make her reach for someone else? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I already knew. And before she could try to explain or apologize or justify what had happened, I told her I wanted a divorce. She jerked back like I'd slapped her, whispering that she didn't expect me to say it first. Tears came, but she didn't reach for me. She didn't even try to. I think a part of her knew she'd gone too far to pull anything back. I signed the papers the following morning. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no last-minute compromises. Just a quiet office, a stack of documents, and the sound of my pen against paper. And then I walked out of Santa Fe without looking back, carrying only what I could bear, and leaving behind everything I no longer recognized. Leaving wasn't dramatic. It was methodical, almost mechanical. I submitted a transfer request at work, and within days secured a placement in the Flagstaff office. The money I'd saved for the Tessouk house, the one that would never belong to us, became my budget for starting over. I deleted every trace of Verena from my phone, blocked her on every platform, erased myself from the circles we used to share. I went as far as shutting down my social media entirely. I didn't want breadcrumbs leading her back to me. Flagstaff felt quieter than Santa Fe, colder in a way that made sense for where I was emotionally. I found a small studio apartment on the edge of the Coconino forest, close enough to the trees that at night I could hear the wind move through them. The first week there, sleep felt like a stranger. My mind wouldn't shut off. It kept replaying the marriage that had collapsed like a structure built on rotten beams. I'd lie awake listening to the creaks of the building, convincing myself it was better to feel lonely in a place built for one than to feel invisible in a home built for two. But the emptiness of those first weeks was heavy. I'd come home to a room that didn't smell like anything. No sketchbooks on the table, no half-finished coffee mugs, no soundtrack of Verena humming while she worked. Just silence stretching across four walls. And for the first time I understood that silence could be as suffocating as noise. Then one night my phone lit up with a call from Lysandra. She hesitated before telling me that Jace had already left Santa Fe. According to what she'd heard, he moved on to another project in Denver only 2 months after growing close to Verena. I remember sitting there staring at the dim ceiling, realizing my marriage had been thrown away for something that barely lasted a season. It didn't make me feel better. It made everything feel cheaper, like the foundation of my life had been traded for a whim. When the holidays came around, I drove to Sedona to see old friends. I wasn't ready, but staying alone felt worse. At a small gathering one night, Verena walked in. I felt her presence before I saw her. When our eyes met, she gave me a small, fragile smile, the same one that once softened me instantly. I said hello. She echoed it, and that was it. But that brief exchange cracked something open inside me I'd been trying to seal shut. I hated that my heart still reacted before my mind could stop it. When I returned to Flagstaff a few days later, I thought the distance would help me reset. Instead, everything shifted again. A coworker mentioned seeing a new name on the list of hires at a local art studio, Verena Holt. At first I told myself it was coincidence. Flagstaff wasn't a big city, but it wasn't tiny either. People moved for work all the time. But then I saw her at the park where I ran every morning. Then again at the public library where I sometimes worked late, and once more at the grocery store near my apartment. 3 times in 1 week in a town she had never even mentioned wanting to live in before. Each time she acted like it was accidental, like she just happened to be in the same place at the same moment. But after the 3rd time, the truth settled over me with a cold clarity. She wasn't here to start over. She was here for me. Following me. Watching me. Trying to insert herself back into a life she had walked away from. As I stood outside my apartment one evening, grocery bag in hand, heart thudding in my chest after seeing her for the 3rd time, a single thought formed with absolute certainty. She wasn't done with me, and I wasn't ready for whatever she wanted next. I kept telling myself the first 2 times were coincidences. Flagstaff wasn't big and people crossed paths without meaning to. But the more it happened, the harder it became to believe that Verena showing up everywhere I went was anything accidental. The first time was at the park where I ran every morning. I saw her sitting on a bench near the trail, pretending to sketch something in her notebook. When she noticed me, she smiled like it was a pleasant surprise. The second time was at a small cafe near my studio, a place I'd only been going to for a week. She walked in right as I was grabbing my usual coffee to go, acting as if she had no idea I'd be there. The 3rd time was at the entrance of my apartment building, too close, too intentional, too perfectly timed for me to brush off. Each encounter left my chest tight, as if the air thinned every time she got within a few feet of me. And every time she tried to speak. She asked how I'd been settling in, whether I liked my new job, why I was avoiding her. I'd cut her off before she got too far, telling her I wasn't ready to talk, that the wounds hadn't closed. that seeing her made everything raw again. She always said she only wanted closure, but looking at her insistence, the way she hovered just long enough, I knew closure wasn't the whole truth. Then one day a co-worker in HR, someone I'd grabbed lunch with a few times, mentioned something that made my stomach drop. She told me Verena had sent applications to 3 different studios in the area, all within a short distance of where I lived and worked. She said it casually, not knowing anything about my past, but to me it confirmed what I'd been afraid to admit. Verena didn't just move to Flagstaff for a job. She moved for me. A few mornings later, she waited for me at the end of the running trail. She stepped in front of me, not aggressively, but firmly enough that I had to stop. Her voice shook when she said she'd been trying to find me on purpose, that she needed to talk, that she didn't know how else to reach me. I told her the truth, that her presence made it hard for me to breathe, that every time she stood in front of me, I felt the weight of everything she broke pressing down on my chest. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the cold morning air hanging between us like something neither one of us could cut through. Around that time, people in our old circle began reacting too. Lysandra posted something online about boundaries and how some people refused to respect them. She didn't name Verena, but everyone understood. Fallon and Dorian messaged me privately. They apologized. They said they hadn't known how bad things were, that they were disappointed in how Verena had handled everything, that they understood why I left. Hearing that didn't make anything better, but it validated the unease I'd been pushing down. The stress began showing up at night. I started having dreams where I was back in the small Santa Fe apartment signing divorce papers over and over, or watching Verena walk away with her phone lighting up with Jace's name. I woke up drenched in sweat, my pulse racing, the sense of helplessness lingering long after the dream faded. It became clear that whatever Verena wanted, her sudden reappearance wasn't harmless. It was taking a toll on me, wearing down the thin layer of stability I'd managed to rebuild. I told myself that if she approached me again, if she stepped into my space one more time, I would have to do something. Not react emotionally, not lash out, but act in a way that would finally put distance between us. The problem was she wasn't slowing down. Every day the line between coincidence and intention blurred further, and I felt the pressure building, waiting for something to give. The third time at the library erased any doubt I had left. I'd been sitting in a quiet corner trying to finish a report when I heard my name whispered behind me. Verena stood there, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair pulled back like she'd been running her hands through it non-stop. She asked if we could talk, her voice trembling. I told her no. I told her I'd said everything I needed to say months ago. But she kept going, begging me to listen, bringing up memories from years ago, asking when everything between us had turned so cold. When I refused again, her face crumpled. She started crying so hard the people around us looked up from their laptops. I left before any of them could start asking questions. Walking out of that library, I felt something twist inside me. Guilt, anger, confusion, all tangled together. Even after everything, watching her break down like that made something inside me ache. I hated that. I hated that she still had that power. That night, my phone buzzed with a call from a number I hadn't seen in months. It was Magnus, her father. He didn't waste time. He told me Verena hadn't been sleeping, hadn't been eating, that she'd become obsessed with making things right even if she didn't know what right was anymore. He said she refused to talk to them about me, but they could tell she was searching for me. Hearing that shook me more than I expected. I asked him why he was telling me this, and he said quietly that he didn't want me to think she was chasing me out of malice. That sometimes people chase the person they broke because they don't know how to live with the damage they caused. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wondered if ignoring her was pushing her further into instability. Another part of me remembered how it felt the day she admitted she felt something for another man, like someone had split my ribs open with their bare hands. That memory was enough to pull me back from any sense of responsibility. The next day, Cordelia called. Her voice was softer, sadder. She told me something Magnus hadn't. After our divorce, Verena had gotten involved with a group called the Aurelius Collective. They'd presented themselves as a community of artists, helping each other invest in creative projects. But in reality, they were exploiting young artists for money. Verena had put in nearly all of her savings before realizing she'd been scammed. Cordelia said the combination of losing her marriage and losing her money had broken something inside her, and she was ashamed to tell anyone until it was too late. Hearing that made my chest tighten with a different kind of pain, one not tied to love, but to the memory of who she used to be before everything fell apart. Later that week, a man from a federal investigation team approached me at work. He asked about my connection to Verena, to the collective, to the anonymous warning they'd received. I realized immediately what had happened. When I'd sent that anonymous email months ago warning Verena that the group looked suspicious, I never thought she would mention me. But she had. My attempt to protect her quietly had pulled me directly into a situation I wanted nothing to do with. I walked out of the building that day feeling caught between two lives, one I'd fought to escape, and one that was trying to drag me back in. The next morning during my run, I saw Verena again. This time she didn't try to stop me. She just stood at a distance, watching, her expression hollow, like she didn't know how to bridge the space between us anymore. For the first time, I wasn't angry, I wasn't scared, I was simply tired. Tired of running from a past that kept following me through every corner of a new city. Tired of being haunted by someone who didn't know how to let me go. Tired of feeling like two lives were overlapping in ways that were beginning to suffocate me. By the time I reached the end of the trail, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: this couldn't continue. Whatever held her to me needed to be severed for good, and whatever held me back from confronting it needed to break. It was time to draw a line neither of us could step over again. When I walked into my building that evening, the first thing I saw was Verena sitting on one of the lobby chairs, her hands clasped tightly, her posture too still to be casual. She didn't rush toward me, didn't call my name. She just waited, watching the elevator lights blink above her as if she'd been counting the minutes until I showed up. My stomach tightened instantly. I told her she couldn't be here, that neighbors might get the wrong idea, that this wasn't appropriate. She stood, voice thin and strained, asking for just one last conversation. I refused. I pressed the elevator button harder than necessary and rode up without looking back. But sometime after midnight, I heard movement outside my door, soft footsteps, then silence. I waited, listening. When morning came, a folded envelope lay neatly in front of my apartment, her handwriting. Inside, pages of apologies, confessions, rambling regret. She wrote that she'd ruined everything we built, that she didn't know how to function without a point of stability. She said she wasn't asking me to forgive her. She just didn't know how to stop falling. Reading it pulled something tight in my chest, not tenderness, but exhaustion. Over the next few days, my sleep collapsed completely. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling my pulse racing for no reason. At work, I couldn't focus. My mind drifted back to her letter, her presence, her shadow hanging over every hour of my day. A coworker finally pulled me aside and asked if I was okay. When I told him vaguely that someone from my past wouldn't leave me alone, he told me the company had support resources, legal and otherwise, if I ever felt unsafe. I brushed it off, but the truth was, the word unsafe had started lingering in the corner of my thoughts. That was when the email arrived. An anonymous message filled with threats accusing me of interfering with business that didn't belong to me, blaming me for Verena backing out of her involvement with the Aurelius Collective. They warned me to stay away or face consequences of my own making. Seeing my name in their message sent a cold ripple through me. I realized I was caught between two storms: Verena's emotional spiral and a dangerous group who believed I was the one who ruined their plans. 2 nights later, Magnus called, his tone clipped and shaken. Verena was missing. She'd left a message saying she needed to fix what she'd broken, and no one had heard from her since. He thought she might be looking for me. Hearing the panic in his voice made something inside me twist. I didn't want responsibility, but I couldn't pretend she didn't exist. And I found her sooner than I expected. When I came home late that evening, she was standing directly in front of my apartment door, arms wrapped around herself, eyes swollen and glassy. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. When she spoke, her voice cracked around the single sentence she managed to get out. "I need your help." I stood there, frozen, torn between fear, anger, and something like pity. But her legs were shaking, and she looked one breath away from collapsing. I stepped aside and opened the door, letting her in because avoidance had already stopped being an option the second she showed up like that. The moment she crossed the threshold, the air in the apartment felt heavy, as if her presence dragged every unspoken thing between us into the room. She stood near the couch, arms hanging uselessly at her sides, trembling like someone bracing for impact. I stayed by the door, unsure how close I should allow myself to stand. For a long moment we didn't speak. Then she exhaled shakily and told me everything in one breath. Aurelius was demanding repayment. They claimed she'd betrayed them because she withdrew her contribution. They told her someone close to her had warned her about them and sabotaged their plans, someone who had to be me. I froze, realizing the anonymous email I once sent her as a warning was no longer anonymous. Either they'd traced it or they simply guessed. The idea that my name was circulating among people capable of threats made my skin crawl. She went on voice cracking as she explained that the group wasn't just manipulating artists financially, they were harassing those who tried to leave, sending threats, showing up at studios uninvited. One of them had mentioned my name to her directly. I felt something cold drop inside me. I hadn't expected my attempt at helping her would drag me this far in. I narrowed my eyes and asked why she'd let my name slip into this at all, why she'd tangled me in something dangerous, after already tearing apart the life we had. She broke then, right there in my living room. She said she'd been stupid, that she'd latched onto Jace because she mistook attention for affection, because she felt me slipping away at the exact moment I was trying to build something better for us. She admitted something else too, that the night before she asked for space, she'd gone to dinner with him alone. She insisted nothing happened, but the fact she'd gone at all told me everything. Our marriage hadn't died the day she left. It died long before, in moments I never saw. As she spoke, her phone buzzed again and again with messages from an unknown number. I glanced at the screen, threats about owed money and a line that made my blood turn hot. Deal with Kale first. Suddenly my apartment didn't feel like shelter. It felt exposed. I could have told her to leave. I could have asked her to take her chaos somewhere else. But the fear in her eyes was real, and despite everything she'd done, I wasn't going to push someone this close to breaking out into the dark, alone. I called Heath, a friend of mine from before the transfer, one of the few people I trusted. When he heard Aurelius's name, he didn't hesitate. He told me the group was already under federal investigation, and Verina's testimony could make a real difference. After I hung up, the weight of everything crashed into me. The past, she broke, the danger she brought, the complicated grief that came from seeing someone you once loved fall apart in front of you. I told her plainly that I'd help her stay safe, that I'd support any legal steps necessary. But I also told her something I needed her to understand: helping her didn't mean I was coming back. She nodded once, tears streaking silently down her cheeks. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something like control settle back into my chest. I wasn't doing this for us. I was doing it because it was the right thing. The chapter where she defined my life was already over. I was simply trying to keep her from being swallowed by the wreckage she helped create. The next morning, we drove to the Flagstaff police station. Verina handed over every message, email, and bank transfer. I gave them the anonymous warning I'd sent and the threats I'd received. Heath told us the puzzle pieces they'd been missing were finally on the table. Aurelius had targeted dozens, Fallon, and even a few of Verina's former friends were on the victim list. Some had already paid thousands, others were being blackmailed. Seeing those names made my stomach twist. This wasn't small-time manipulation. This was calculated exploitation. Within days, a coordinated raid shut down their operations. Multiple members were arrested on site. Their leader tried to run but didn't make it past the state line. The federal agents used the threatening emails against them, including the ones directed at me. Hearing that made my skin crawl in a different way, relief mixed with recognition of how close things had come. Later, I learned the person who had sent the worst messages had been the same man who approached Verina months ago pretending to represent a gallery. He admitted they hunted for vulnerable artists, especially ones freshly out of relationships. As much as I hated hearing it, I also felt a strange pang of compassion. Verina had walked into the trap carrying every piece of her brokenness, and they'd seen it as an opportunity. After the raid, she asked to meet me. We sat on a bench outside the station. She said the spiral began the day she asked for space, that she'd run toward the first feeling that distracted her from what she'd broken with me. She said losing me left a void she tried to fill with all the wrong things, until the wrong things consumed her. I listened quietly. When she finished, I told her I didn't hate her, but I had no place left in the version of her life she kept trying to rebuild around me. This time she nodded without pleading. Her parents called next, not to convince me to soften, but to apologize for everything. Magnus said they were taking her back to Portland for long-term therapy and pulling her away from the industry entirely. I wished them well. I meant it. When I got home, I opened every window and let the cold Flagstaff air roll through the apartment. I hadn't realized how suffocating the past months had been until the space felt clean again. I started therapy. I took walks alone in the quiet. I let myself breathe without someone else's shadow stretching behind me. One morning, standing at the edge of the Coconino forest watching the sun rise between the pines, I finally felt something loosen inside me. Not closure, not triumph, just a simple truth settling into place. I didn't know where I was going next, but I knew exactly where I wouldn't return. I'd chosen myself this time, and for the first time that felt like enough. I used to think closure was something someone else had to give you, an apology, an explanation, a final conversation that tied everything together neatly. But standing there in the quiet of Flagstaff with the last remnants of Verina's chaos finally settling, I realized closure wasn't something she could ever hand me. It was something I had to build myself piece by piece, breath by breath, choice by choice. For months I let the past haunt every corner of my life. I kept running from echoes that didn't belong to me anymore. I kept waiting for her absence to feel clean instead of complicated. But healing isn't a single moment. It's the small decisions you make when no one else is watching. It's choosing not to carry what isn't yours. It's finally telling yourself the truth you're allowed to move on even when the story didn't end the way you hoped. Helping Verina face the Aurelius Collective didn't close old wounds. It didn't fix what she broke. But it reminded me of something important. Compassion and boundaries can exist at the same time. You can care about someone's safety without placing yourself back in the line of fire. You can wish someone well without wishing to go back. And when I said goodbye to her for the last time, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year: quiet. Not empty. Not hollow. Just quiet. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again. The kind that lets you breathe. I don't know exactly what comes next. Maybe I'll stay in Flagstaff. Maybe I'll move again. Maybe I'll finally buy a place that's only mine this time, not a future I tried to build around someone else. What I do know is that I'm no longer living in the shadow of a marriage that wasn't built to last. I'm no longer waiting for someone to choose me. I'm choosing myself finally, fully, without apology. And if you've ever been in a place like this, lost between who you were and who you're becoming, I hope you know you're not alone. Sometimes all it takes is one story, one moment of being heard to make the road ahead feel a little less heavy. Before I go, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I always appreciate seeing how far a story travels. Sometimes that connection is what keeps people going when everything else feels uncertain. And if my story meant something to you, even in a small way, feel free to subscribe. It helps more than you know, and maybe it'll help someone else who needs to hear a story like this at the right moment. Thank you for staying with me through all of this. Whatever comes next this time, I'm stepping into it on my own terms. After my father-in-law's funeral, my jobless wife smiled like she'd won the lottery. She said, "I'm rich now and you're useless." Then she threw divorce papers on the table before I'd even folded his flag from the coffin. 24 hours later, the lawyer called her back in, laughed, and asked, "Did you even read the will?" I was there when her face went pale. The man she thought left her $500 million had actually left her a lesson. My name's Arden Quill, and I never thought the person I buried that week would be the only one who truly saw my worth. The day my marriage ended was also the day I learned what real inheritance means, because it had nothing to do with money. Before I share my story, I'd love to know you're here with me. Comment hi or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes knowing someone's out there makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if this story reaches your heart even a little, hit subscribe and join our growing circle of people who've been through betrayal, heartbreak, and still found a way back to themselves. Because stories like ours deserve to be heard. The air in Tasuk that morning was sharp and dry, the kind that clings to your throat and makes every breath taste like dust and pine. The adobe church sat against a backdrop of ochre hills, its white cross barely visible in the late sunlight. Inside, the smell of beeswax and pinon smoke blended with the faint murmur of people remembering Bo Larkin, the man everyone here swore had built half the heart of Santa Fe. I stood near the front, straightening a wreath from the Southside Community Center, the place he'd poured his life into. My name is Arden Quill, 31, software deployment manager, son-in-law to a man who believed wealth wasn't what you kept, it was what you gave. And as I watched the line of mourners file past, all I could think was how strange it felt that Bo's absence filled the room more than his presence ever had. Maris, my wife, stood in the first row like she owned the air between the pews. 33, restless, dressed in a cream dress that shimmered against the somber colors of the crowd. She hadn't shed a tear all morning. When people whispered legacy, her eyes gleamed not with grief, but calculation. Every time someone mentioned the Larkin estate, her phone lit up in her hand like a nervous tick. I saw her scrolling, smiling faintly, as if counting the condolences like dollar signs. The ceremony moved with quiet dignity. Cecily Romero, Bo's attorney, sat 2 rows back, hands clasped around a worn notebook. I caught her glance, once steady knowing. When the choir sang, "Nearer, my God, to thee," Maris leaned close to me and whispered, "You know Dad had $500 million tied up. Once the paperwork clears, I'm done scraping by." I blinked. $500 million, I repeated quietly. She smiled, eyes still on the altar. "You heard me. We'll finally live like people who deserve to." Her tone made it sound less like hope and more like entitlement. After the service, I helped the volunteers from Southside carry folding chairs and stack hymn books. They thanked me, told me how Bo's donations kept their programs alive, how he'd funded ramps for the disabled, plumbing for an elder's home, scholarships for local kids. I kept hearing the same phrase. He didn't just build houses, he built people. Maris, meanwhile, was near the parking lot laughing into her phone under the winter sun, the white of her dress almost blinding. As the last guests left, Cecily approached, her coat collar pulled up against the wind. "Ardan," she said softly, extending her hand. "He left something for you." I frowned. "For me, Wednesday," she said. "Canyon Road. He wanted you there before anyone else." "What did he say?" I asked. Cecily smiled the way someone does when they're holding a secret that isn't theirs to tell. "He said you're the only one who looked at his notes and saw what they really meant." That night, as I loaded the leftover flowers into my truck, I thought about those words. About Bo's small, tidy handwriting in his ledger, how he'd written "spend only where it makes someone's day lighter." He was a man who measured value in impact, not size. And yet his own daughter stood on that very principal's grave, waiting for a number to save her. I didn't know it then, but that morning's chill wasn't from the weather. It was from the first crack in a marriage built on 2 different definitions of worth. Cecily's words echoed on the drive home, "Canyon Road. He left something for you." I looked in the rearview mirror, saw the string of red chili ristras hanging from the church's adobe wall, swaying in the wind. Bo once told me they were a reminder: season your life, but never overdo it. Too much spice ruins the stew. I just didn't know that soon the woman beside me would be the one burning it from within. By the time I turned into the dim streets of Santa Fe, the question had rooted deep in my chest. What exactly was that $500 million a fortune, or a warning? The night after the funeral, our small apartment near the rail yard felt colder than usual. The space heater buzzed under the table as I went through our bills, credit card statements, rent, utilities, all stacked like silent accusations. My laptop screen glowed against the kitchen's pale walls, numbers bleeding red across our budget sheet. Every month ended the same way, my paycheck gone, our savings smaller. I had been working 2 contracts days at the firm, nights coding freelance while Maris stayed home. She said job hunting was pointless until life changes. The door clicked open just before 10. Maris walked in smelling like expensive perfume and bar smoke. She dropped her purse on the counter and kicked off her heels, not even glancing at the table full of bills. "Rough night?" I asked. She yawned. "Just catching up with people who matter now that Dad's gone." I said nothing. The coffee maker hissed in the corner, counting seconds louder than either of us. When I showed her the spreadsheet, she barely looked. "We're down again," I said. "You spent $400 on skincare, $200 on a resort weekend, and another $1,000 at a spa in Scottsdale. We need to slow down." She smirked, pouring herself wine. "Why a few more weeks and I'll have access to the inheritance? You can stop pretending to budget like we're broke." I stared at her. "Broke isn't a mindset, Maris. It's math." She sipped. "You sound just like him." "Bo, yeah. Always about purpose, charity, restraint. He never lived." Her eyes hardened. "I will." Her words hit like ice water. "He spent his life helping people breathe easier," I said. "That's what money should do." She laughed, short, brittle. "Then I'll help myself breathe first with 500 million. Later, when she went to shower, I noticed the notifications on her phone screen: transfers, withdrawals. Curiosity turned into dread. I opened the laptop again, cross-checked our joint account. The numbers didn't add up. Thousands missing moved in small sums to a digital wallet under her name. Transactions spread across 3 months, the same months Bo had been hospitalized. My throat tightened. When she came back, I asked, "You've been moving money?" She shrugged. "I took care of Dad." "You think candles and rides to the doctor pay for themselves?" I said quietly. "The caregiver I hired did the bathing and the driving. You were busy posting brunch photos." Her face went blank. "You're accusing me. I'm asking for honesty." "I deserve something, Ardan," she snapped. "I've been stuck with your boring paycheck while waiting for my life to start." I stared at her, this woman who'd once said she wanted a life that meant something. Now she only meant more. I didn't argue. There was no point. Every word I said only made her dig deeper into the illusion that money would rewrite her character. Instead, I did what Bo once taught me: stay still when the storm comes. I backed up our financial records, printed the statements, and locked them away. If the inheritance wasn't what she thought, she'd already built her own trap. That night, as she fell asleep scrolling through real estate listings in Taos, I sat on the couch looking at an old photo on my phone, Bo and me installing the ramp outside his house. His hands had been steady despite the tremor of age. Spend wisely, he'd told me, not loudly. I understood him now more than ever. Through the window, the Santa Fe lights flickered like restless stars. Somewhere between their glow and the silence of our apartment, I realized the countdown had begun, not to wealth, but to revelation. In 2 days, we'd be on Canyon Road for the will reading. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I might lose. I was ready to see what she'd built her entire world on, and how fast it would crumble once truth took its first breath. The morning light in Tasuk slipped through the blinds like liquid gold, catching the edges of Bo's old cedar desk. That smell, cedar and paper, always reminded me of the way he spoke, calm, grounded, practical. It was the morning before the will reading on Canyon Road, and I sat in the quiet of his study, the room still filled with his presence. On the far corner of the desk was a sealed envelope with red wax, my name written in his handwriting, deliberate and steady. I had seen it before, months ago, when he'd first asked me to help organize his project files. I hadn't dared open it then. Now I knew I had to. I ran my fingers across the grain of the cedar drawer and opened it. Inside were documents, loan agreements, community project reports, and one thick folder labeled Southside Community Center Recovery Plan. Bo had always been proud of that project. He once told me, "If I can give people a place to learn and work, it's better than leaving them checks they'll waste." The folder contained the financial guts of that dream, a signed pledge stating $500,000 pledged as collateral to restructure community liabilities. Not inheritance, not cash. It was collateral, a promise against a debt. The room seemed to tilt for a moment as I pieced it together. The entire city believed Bo had $500 million sitting idle in a vault. Even Maris. But the truth was different. Months before his death, supply chain failures and rising interest rates had nearly sunk his community initiative. He had mortgaged everything he owned to keep his workers employed to keep those community buildings from collapsing mid-project. The bank had given him a grace period 2 years to restore the balance before foreclosure. In the corner of one document, I found a handwritten note. If I don't get to explain this myself, make sure someone does, and only when the moment is right. That's what he meant when he told Cecily to contact me separately. He'd never trusted Maris to handle nuance. To her, everything came in 2 colors: win or lose. I could still hear his voice from that afternoon months ago. He had been sitting right there, a mug of black coffee in hand, eyes tired but alive. I didn't tell Maris, he said, because she'd turned my funeral into a gold rush. She won't understand collateral or grace periods, just numbers. You do. You see purpose where others see totals. He paused, looked at me the way a mentor looks at a student he wishes were family. So when it's time, let the truth speak for itself. I closed my eyes and remembered nodding silently that day. He'd smiled faintly and added, every inheritance carries a test. Some people inherit the money. Some inherit the meaning. Now back in the stillness of his study, I unfolded one last page, a typed addendum marked, for executor reference. It was a clause Maris didn't know existed. Any personal allowance granted to a direct heir would be paid monthly contingent on proof of employment or active training for at least 20 hours a week. Without it, no payment, no exceptions. Even the small stipend Beau set aside for Maris came with responsibility. And that massive $500 million that wasn't for anyone to spend, it was already working, already pledged to others. It wasn't a fortune to inherit. It was a debt he'd embraced for the sake of people who'd never know his name. For a moment, I wondered if I should warn her. Maybe spare her the public humiliation that was bound to come. But then Beau's note came back to me. Only when the moment is right. If I told her now, she'd twist it, claim I was manipulating the will. She'd learn nothing. So I locked the papers back inside the cedar drawer, sealing the truth behind a layer of polished wood and quiet resolve. Outside, the wind carried the dry rustle of chile ristras swaying on the porch. Somewhere a bell rang in the distance. The countdown had begun. By the next morning, the legal storm would start, and the man she thought I was the useless husband would be the only one who knew what she was walking into. That night, the house in Tasuk felt more like a museum than a home. The guests had long gone, the scent of flowers turning bitter in the still air. The lamps cast a honey glow across the floor, soft but lonely. I was gathering the framed photos of Beau from the mantel, him at the groundbreaking of Southside, cutting the ribbon with children crowding around, when the door opened. Maris stepped in her heels, clicking against the tile, her perfume thick and confident. She'd changed out of her black dress into something sharp and bright, almost celebratory. There was something in her eyes, relief disguised as triumph. Without a word, she placed a stack of papers on the table between us. I didn't need to look to know what they were. "Sign it," she said flatly. "You're not part of this anymore. I don't need a man with a paycheck when I'm about to have $500 million. The words didn't sting the way she wanted them to. I just looked at her, really looked at the woman who'd once promised me partnership, now talking like a stranger. "Are you sure you don't want to wait until the will is read?" I asked quietly. "I already know what it says," she shot back, chin lifted. "Don't act like you understand business, Ardan. Dad took care of me." I nodded slowly. "He did," I said. "Just maybe not the way you think." She sighed in irritation, crossed her arms. "You've always been jealous of what I deserve." Her voice carried that brittle mix of pride and fear. I signed the paper, the pen scratching across the line like a closing door. "File it yourself," I said. "Send my things when you're done." As I turned toward the hallway, a gust of wind from the open window flipped one of Beau's photos face down. I bent to pick it up, and a slip of paper fell from the frame. His handwriting again, small, calm. "Stay steady when the storm comes." I slid it into my pocket and walked toward the front door. Behind me, Maris's voice softened almost to herself. "You'll regret this when I'm gone." "I already have," I said, not turning back. Outside, the air was cold, the string of chili peppers twisting in the breeze like red lanterns. I paused on the porch just long enough to hear her phone ring inside. Her tone changed instantly, lighter, conspiratorial. He signed. "You'll get your share once the money clears. Just keep quiet." I stood there in the dark, the sound of her laughter cutting through the quiet like a knife. So she had a partner in this, someone waiting for their piece of the dream. Maybe an old friend, maybe a creditor. It didn't matter. The shape of greed was always the same. As I walked to my truck, I glanced down at the signature on my copy of the divorce form. Beneath it in fine print was the date and clause, effective 24 hours after final signature. I froze for a moment. That meant she'd already filed the petition earlier, only waiting for me to complete it. 24 hours. That was how long it would take for my name to disappear from her life, just as the illusion of wealth would soon disappear from hers. I sat in the driver's seat for a while before starting the engine, my hands resting on the wheel. No anger, no bitterness. Just a quiet, steady pulse of clarity. Bo once told me, "Sometimes losing is the only way to keep your own soul." Now I understood. Through the windshield I could still see the faint glow of the house behind me, the home that wasn't really mine, filled with things that never belonged to either of us. Somewhere inside, Maris was probably toasting her freedom, believing she'd traded up. But I had seen what she hadn't: the papers in the cedar drawer, the truth waiting to undo her illusions. By the time that clause took effect, and by the time the bank locked the accounts, her empire of air would vanish. And when the storm came, as it always does, I would do exactly what Bo had asked. I'd stay steady. By the next morning, the world had rearranged itself into silence. The papers were signed, the house behind me no longer mine, and yet I felt lighter than I should have. I checked into a small hotel near Santa Fe Plaza, opened the window, and watched the city breathe under the winter sun. I told myself this was freedom, but it still tasted like ash. Then my phone buzzed with a single message from Cecily. "The will reading has been moved up. Be ready." Meanwhile, miles south in Albuquerque, Maris was dressed for victory. Her heels clicked across the marble floor of Los Pinos Trust Bank, the kind of place with walls of glass and silence so thick it made you whisper. She was accompanied by her lawyer, a young man with slicked back hair who looked more like a salesman than counsel. They approached the counter, her voice ringing with entitlement. "I'm here to access the Larkin estate account. My father passed last week and I'm the sole heir." The banker smiled politely, typed something, then stopped. The pause was long enough to cut through the air. He checked again, slower this time. "Mrs. Larkin, I'm afraid there's a restriction on that account." Maris frowned. "Restriction? What does that mean?" "The funds are supposed to transfer." The man's tone shifted. "The $500 million in question has been temporarily frozen pending collateral review. The assets are pledged, not liquid." Her eyes widened. "Excuse me, that's my inheritance." The banker cleared his throat and handed her a document stamped in blue ink. "It's collateral for a community redevelopment loan. Mr. Larkin's records indicate the balance was due to be settled this quarter. Until that's completed, the funds can't be accessed." Maris's voice sharpened. "You're saying I can't touch a single dollar?" The branch manager arrived, older, deliberate, holding a file. "Mrs. Larkin, your father used that account to secure employment projects for hundreds of people. The estate isn't bankrupt, but it's not distributable either. In simpler terms, the money is serving someone else before it can ever serve you." Somewhere around that moment, my phone started vibrating in my hotel room. Her name flashed on the screen, the same name that once made me smile. I answered. Her voice came through like a blade. "What did you do?" she screamed. "You locked it, didn't you? You're trying to steal from me." I kept my tone even. "I didn't do anything, Maris. Have you read the will yet? I don't need to read it. My father would never hand power to an outsider, especially not you." I took a slow breath. "Then maybe you should ask yourself why Cecily told you to prepare yourself before the reading." There was silence, followed by the sound of her breathing, sharp, uneven. "You're lying," she said, but her voice was smaller now. "Your father didn't hide money, Maris," I said quietly. "He used it. You just never noticed where." She hung up. Minutes later, another text came in, this one from Cecily. Arden, come to Canyon Road immediately. There's a clause they haven't read yet. 3 hours. I closed my bag and grabbed my jacket. As I stepped out into the cold, the world felt like it was finally catching up with the truth I'd been carrying. At the same time, in the parking lot outside Los Pinos Trust, Maris stormed toward her car. A man was leaning against it, a familiar face I recognized from old photos. His name was Grant, a real estate broker Bo had fired years ago for falsifying contracts. Maris froze when she saw him, so he said with a crooked smile, heard the gold mines locked. She crossed her arms. It's just temporary. He laughed low and mean. You said you'd have the funds by now. I put in $100,000 to prep that Taos deal you wanted. If I don't get it back this week, I'm filing fraud. She blinked fast, her confidence cracking. It's coming. I just need a few days. Days you don't have, he said, stepping closer. You played the wrong hand, sweetheart. That money was never yours. When he drove off, she stood there, trembling, clutching her phone. For the first time, she looked less like a woman waiting for wealth and more like someone realizing she'd been the last to understand the rules. Back on the highway to Santa Fe, I felt my phone buzz again. Cecily had sent me a photo, a handwritten page from Bo's will. If any heir refuses to face the truth, the bank has the right to suspend all assets until the accompanying condition is fulfilled. The condition was attached in a second image, the clause I had found in the cedar drawer. Employment or training 20 hours per week or forfeiture. Bo had predicted everything, the entitlement, the blindness, the crash. He hadn't written a will for a daughter. He'd written a mirror for her to finally see herself. As the mountains appeared on the horizon, the sky began to glow with the color of iron turning to fire. I thought about calling her, giving her a warning. But then I remembered Bo's words. Truth needs the right setting to be heard. By the time I reached Canyon Road, the wind had picked up, carrying dust and cold light through the art district. The next few hours would decide everything. And somewhere in Albuquerque, Maris Larkin was beginning to understand what it meant to inherit a dream she had never believed in. Cecily Romero's office sat tucked between two adobe galleries on Canyon Road, its walls lined with paintings of open skies and broken mesas. When I arrived that afternoon, the sun was low enough to paint everything gold. Inside, the air was tight, the kind of silence that hums before something breaks. Cecily greeted me with her usual composure, though I could see the fatigue behind her eyes. She's already here, she said quietly. Maris sat at the far end of the long wooden table, her lawyer beside her phone, face down, knuckles white. She didn't look up when I walked in. The representative from Los Pinos Trust, Mr. Fields, adjusted his tie and opened a briefcase full of documents. Cecily cleared her throat. Let's begin. The reading started with the standard language, formal, impersonal. Then came the division of assets, personal property, charitable allocations, and finally the estate fund. Maris's impatience bled through every breath. Can we skip to the part where it says my name? She snapped. Cecily glanced up. We'll get there, but you may want context first. I don't need context, Maris said. I just need the number. Cecily's eyes softened with something like pity. Very well. Under Section 3 Estate Financial Holdings, the document states, the $500 million held under Larkin Trust are pledged as collateral for ongoing community development obligations. She looked at Maris directly. Do you know what collateral means? Maris blinked, confused. You're saying I can't access it. I'm saying it isn't money sitting in a vault, Cecily replied. It's what your father used to keep hundreds of workers employed when the markets collapsed. He didn't hoard wealth. He recycled it. Maris shook her head. That's impossible. He told me I'd be taken care of. He did, Cecily said gently. Just not in the way you think. Mr. Fields handed her a folder. Per the conditions of collateral, these funds remain under the bank's control until the obligations are fully met. There is no inheritance in the conventional sense. Maris stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. This isn't real, she whispered. Cecily exhaled softly and then unexpectedly laughed. It wasn't cruel, just a sound of disbelief at the sheer irony. You know, Mrs. Larkin, you filed your divorce this morning. By law, that means you're no longer a spouse at the time of this reading. Therefore, you're excluded from the personal bequest of $80,000 your father left for you. You signed yourself out. The room went still. Maris's jaw clenched, eyes darting toward me. You knew about this, didn't you? I shook my head. No, but he did warn you about timing. Cecily continued, her tone even. To ensure fairness, Mr. Larkin left a separate amount, $40,000, to Mr. Arden Quill for professional and personal assistance rendered during his illness. It's a recognition, not charity. I felt heat rise to my face. I didn't expect. I know, she said quietly. He trusted you to use it wisely. Maris looked stricken, her lawyer whispering something she didn't seem to hear. Then Mr. Field spoke again, laying a new document on the table. There's one final matter. As of today, the $500 million has been officially transferred to the Bo Larkin Foundation, designated as a permanent community trust. No individual inheritance will be granted. Maris's voice broke. So it's gone, all of it not gone, Cecily said. Repurposed. Your father believed responsibility was a form of wealth. This was his way of teaching it one last time. I reached into my jacket and unfolded the sealed letter I'd been carrying since the funeral. Cecily nodded for me to read. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Bo's handwriting was the same as always, careful, deliberate. If you're reading this, it means you kept your calm when the storm arrived. You were never meant to protect my money, Arden. You were meant to protect its meaning. Thank you for seeing what others couldn't. I stopped. The silence in the room stretched, heavy but strangely peaceful. Maris's eyes shimmered, her expression cracking as the truth settled in. For the first time, I didn't see arrogance in her just loss. Not the loss of money, but of the father she'd never truly known. Cecily closed the folder, her voice softening. It's over. Maris stood abruptly, gathering her purse, but before she left, she looked at me. He trusted you more than me, she said. I met her gaze. He didn't trust either of us with money. He trusted us with choices. She didn't reply. She just turned and walked out into the golden light flooding Canyon Road. Cecily packed up the papers, glancing at me. She'll come back, she said quietly. When the illusions fall away, people usually look for the one person who told them the truth. I stepped outside into the crisp afternoon, the sun glowing against the adobe walls. Down the street, a group of children laughed, chasing a paper kite that fluttered in the breeze. Somewhere between the sound of their laughter and the rustle of dry leaves, I realized Bo's plan had worked. He'd made sure his wealth stayed alive, not in accounts, but in people. And in that moment, for the first time since the funeral, I finally felt at peace. 3 days after the reading, I drove to Southside at dusk, the wind combing through the high grass like a tired hand. The lot looked smaller without Bo's voice in it. Sun-faded signage sagged on its posts, concrete walls blotched with rain scars, the bronze plaque catching a thin bar of light for those who build without taking. I set a taper at the base and lit at the flame, holding steady in the wind shadow of the wall. A handful of local kids in paint-splattered hoodies were scraping graffiti off a doorway. One girl wiped her forehead and asked if I'd known Mr. Larkin. I told her I owed him a lesson in kindness. She nodded like she understood and went back to work. I was stuffing site maps back into a banker's box for the bank when footsteps came across the gravel. Maris. The air around her looked heavier than she did. She clutched a file bag to her chest, hair pulled back, lipstick gone. You still come here? She asked, like it was an accusation. This is the part that's mine, I said. Not money. The reason I helped him. She glanced at the plaque, then down at the dust on her shoes. The bank says I can still get $2,000 a month, she said, voice tight, if I'm employed or in training. No one will hire me. Can you tell them I worked at your company? I took my time answering. The volunteers' rollers thudded on drywall in slow rhythm. I'm not going to lie to fix a lie, I said. If you want the stipend, earn it. They're hiring trainees here. Ask. Her mouth trembled. She opened the file bag. Grant is threatening to sue, she said. He wants his seed money back for the Taos deal, 60 grand. He says I misrepresented. If I don't pay by the end of the month, he'll file. I felt something settle into place, the missing cash from our joint account withdrawn in quiet drips while Bo was in the hospital. You used that money, I said. It wasn't yours to spend. Nothing was ever mine, she shot back, then sank onto the raw concrete step like a string had been cut. I kept telling myself it would even out when the inheritance came. I built my life on a number that didn't exist. I opened the project binder Bo had left me and pulled a single-page letter addressed to the bank and site leadership. His language was formal but kind. If Maris falters, give her a door back in, but only if she comes to the site and works in good faith. I handed it to her. He planned for this, I said. You have a chance. But it happens here, not in a showroom. She read the letter in silence, tears slipping without drama. He knew me, she whispered. Better than I wanted him to. She looked up at me, eyes emptied of performance. You won, she said. I didn't, I answered. I just kept the one thing I couldn't sell, my name. Wind sighed through the rebar. A volunteer brought us a stack of gloves without a word and kept walking. Maris sat a long time, then nodded, small and honest. Who do I talk to? I pointed toward the site trailer. Ask for Cruz. Start where everyone else starts. As she stood, the late sun broke through a seam of cloud and threw a gold stripe across the half-built wall. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't see ruins. I saw a job list. I promised myself I'd stay until the kids didn't need promises. Later, as I taped shut the banker's box, I found one more envelope Bo had sealed for me. On the outside, he'd written, "When you're ready to start over." I tucked it into my jacket and left the flame to finish its small work. 6 months later, spring woke Santa Fe with white blooms on the cholla outside my studio. Morning light poured across the wood floor like water, catching dust motes in a framed site plan of Southside now striped with check marks. Phase 1 stood open, a computer lab, a workshop, a multi-purpose room that smelled like fresh paint and cold metal. The 40,000 Bo left me had gone out in a single transfer, seed money for scholarships and machines. I'd written the memo line with a lump in my throat, Bo and Ardon Fund. That morning I opened the last envelope. His handwriting had thinned, but the voice was the same. When you're ready, use what you have to replant what I started. My money is over. Its meaning isn't. I folded it back into the sleeve and put on my jacket. At Southside, Cecily was already there with Mr. Fields reviewing the Foundation's quarterly report. He would be proud, she said, handing me a copy. The bank is recognizing this as self-sustaining. The debt's been retired by operations and matched funds. Outside the glass, a group of teens huddled over a small robot arguing about why it veered left. In the art room, a woman with her hair tied up was helping kids sketch logos on butcher paper. Maris. She looked up, caught my eye, and gave me a nod that landed like a truce. She met me in the hallway with an envelope. What I owe you, she said. 10,000. I'm not asking for anything. I just want it off me. I opened it and saw the check, plus a short note in her handwriting. I found a job. It's not glamorous. It's real. Keep it, I said. When you cover someone else's tuition or rent, I'll consider the debt paid. Her mouth quirked into something like a smile. I start full-time next week, she said. Program assistant. I know where the brooms are now. She started to walk away, then turned back. Thank you for not humiliating me when you could have. It wasn't mercy, I said. It was Bo's design. Cecily waved me toward the courtyard. The board had set up folding chairs and a small podium under a string of paper flags. Families gathered with phones out. The plaque had been polished. The letters threw off fresh light. When they introduced me, I felt the old panic rise, the part of me that prefers code to microphones. But then I saw the kids through the glass wall, heads bent over their projects, and the words came. Mr. Larkin once staked his fortune so other people wouldn't lose a paycheck, I said. He could have left us money. He left us work. I can't match what he risked, but I can match his intent. I put my small share back into this place and got something bigger in return. He traded wealth for responsibility. I traded my anger for quiet. We both made a profit. A few people laughed softly at that. The wind caught the flags, the chimes on the porch clinked against each other like glass coins. At the back row, Maris stood with her hands clasped, eyes bright, not asking for the front anymore.